There is a place where the light does not fall as it should, where the golden canopy above has thinned to gossamer threads, and the shadows beneath grow long and heavy, like water pooling in the hollows of ancient stone. The air here carries the faint sweetness of incense, long since burned to ash, and the ground beneath one's feet is soft, not with soil but with the accumulated weight of memory and regret. If you close your eyes and listen, you can hear something breathing. Not a creature, not the wind, something older, something that has been holding its breath for a very long time. This is the realm of shadow, and the story of how it came to be hidden from the world, sealed behind veils of divine will and deliberate forgetting, is perhaps the most sorrowful chapter in all the lands between. It is a story about memory and its opposite, about the terrible weight of things chosen not to be remembered, about a woman who became a god and in doing so decided that certain truths were too dangerous to exist alongside. The light she wished to cast upon the world. To understand the realm of shadow, one must first understand what was lost. Long before the Erdtree rose in its magnificent golden splendour, long before the Golden Order codified its rigid laws of causality and life, there existed a different kind of divinity. The Crucible, that primordial wellspring from which all life bubbled forth, was wild, untamed, and indiscriminate in its blessings. It sprouted horns and feathers and tails upon the creatures it touched. It grew tangled roots that reached in every direction, not toward any singular sky, but in all directions at once, as if searching for something it could never quite find. The people who lived closest to the Crucible revered it. They were called the Horn-Scent, and they bore its marks upon their bodies with pride. Horns curled from their temples like the branches of young trees. Their skin carried the textures of bark and scale. They built great spiralling towers that mirrored the Crucible's own growth patterns, and they worshipped in sanctuaries where the boundary between flesh and earth grew thin and permeable. To them, the Crucible was not chaos. It was completeness, the full expression of life in all its strange and tangled abundance. But there was a woman who saw differently, a woman who had walked among the Horn-Scent, who had known their ways and their worship, and who had come to believe that the Crucible's indiscriminate blessings were not a gift, but a curse, that life untended, ungoverned, growing in every direction at once, was not wholeness, but madness. She believed in order. She believed in gold. Her name was Marika. She came from the hinterlands, from a place where the Erdtree's light had not yet reached, a village of humble people who lived in the shadow of greater powers. The shamans they were called, and they possessed a gift that made them both revered and vulnerable. Their flesh could be grafted to others, blended with other beings, in a communion that was as much suffering as it was sacred. The Horn-Scent saw this quality and used it, pressing the shamans into ritual service, joining their flesh to jars of melded remains in ceremonies that honoured the Crucible but paid no regard to the agony of those who served as vessels. Marika survived this. She carried it with her, the memory of her people's pain, the knowledge that the wild divinity of the Crucible could be as cruel as it was generous. And perhaps it was this memory, more than any theological conviction, that drove her toward the choice she would eventually make. Not merely a rejection of chaos, but a rejection of the suffering that chaos permitted. And what she did next, the sin she committed in the name of that belief, would echo across millennia, reshaping the very fabric of the world and consigning an entire land to perpetual shadow. The realm of shadow was not always hidden. It was once simply part of the world, connected, continuous, the same earth, the same sky, the same roots running beneath the surface. But Marika, having ascended to godhood through means that remain whispered and uncertain, made a choice that would define the Golden Order for all time. She sealed away the land, she tore the shadow from the Erdtree and cast it, along with everything it touched, into a separate place, a realm apart, veiled from sight, removed from the clean golden narrative she wished to tell about the world. The Scadutree is the proof of this severance. where the Erdtree stands tall and radiant, its canopy blazing with warmth and light, the Scadutree writhes. It is twisted to dark, its trunk coiling like a serpent in agony. Its branches drip with a black sap that smells of sorrow and old magic. It is not dead, far from it. It thrives with a fierce, desperate vitality, as if straining against the very bonds that hold it in place. The Scadutree is everything the Erdtree refuses to acknowledge. It is the shadow the Golden Order cast in its brilliance, the darkness that must exist for there to be light. It is the suppressed memory, the buried truth, the thing that festers in the space between what is spoken and what is known. To stand beneath the Scadutree is to feel the weight of an entire world's worth of forgetting. The air grows thick, the light takes on a bruised quality, purples and deep golds bleeding into one another. And there is a sound, not quite music, not quite wind, that seems to come from the tree itself, as if it is trying to speak through bark and branch and root, trying to say what it remembers, what it was before it was made into a shadow. Marika left someone behind to guard this place, to ensure that the veiled realm remained veiled, that the secrets buried there would stay buried. She left her son, Messmer. There are many children attributed to Marika, and each of them carries some fragment of her divine will, some aspect of her ambition, her sorrow, her guilt. But Messmer carries something different. He carries her exile, born with a curse that burned inside him from the very beginning, an abyssal serpent flame that coiled around his heart and licked at the edges of his mind. Messmer was both weapon and prison. His fire was not the clean, golden flame of the Erdtree. It was dark, hungry, reaching. It consumed without illuminating, and it was bound to him so completely that to extinguish it would mean extinguishing himself. Marika gave him a spear and a purpose and left him in the land she had sealed away. She told him, or perhaps she simply implied, for Marika was never one for direct speech, that he was to be the guardian, the keeper, the one who ensured that nothing escaped the realm of shadow and nothing disturbed its silence. And Messmer, loyal in the way that only the abandoned can be loyal, accepted. He held his spear, he watched the borders, he burned what needed burning and buried what needed burying, and the centuries passed. There is a particular quality to time when spent in isolation. It does not flow as it does in the living world, marked by seasons and harvests, and the turning of generations. In the realm of shadow, time pools. It accumulates in corners and crevices, thickens like the Scadutree's sap, grows dense with unexpressed meaning. Messmer felt this accumulation. He felt the weight of years pressing against the inside of his skull, felt the fire in his chest settling into rhythms that corresponded not to days or moons, but to something deeper, the slow pulse of a sealed land breathing its own stale air. Messmer did not age as mortals age, but he changed. The fire inside him grew more restless. The serpent that shared his body grew more aware. He led armies, the soldiers who had come with him, into the sealed realm, those who had chosen service over the uncertainty of the new Golden Order, and he waged wars against those who still worshipped the old ways, against the Hornsent and their spiralling towers, against anyone who remembered the crucible with fondness rather than fear. But there is a particular cruelty in being tasked with destroying the very things your mother wished to forget. Because to destroy them, you must first understand them. And to understand them is to see the world as it was before the Golden Order drew its clean lines and declared that this was light and that was shadow, this was holy and that was profane. Messmer understood, in the quiet moments between battles, in the long hours when the Scadutree's whispers grew loud enough to hear, he understood that his mother's order was built upon a foundation of deliberate amnesia, that the golden light he served was made brighter by all the darkness she had pushed to the edges. He understood, and he stayed anyway. Because what else was there? The fire would not leave him. The purpose was all he had. In time, others found their way to the realm of shadow, not through the veils Marika had erected, those held firm, but through other paths, older paths, the kind that open when enough sorrow accumulates in one place. Pilgrims and seekers, drawn by rumours of a land where the old powers still lingered, where one might find truths that the Golden Order had scrubbed from its histories. Among them came those who served Miquella. Miquella, the eternal child, another of Marika's offspring, had long been a figure of fascination and pity. Cursed to inhabit the body of a child forever, he had devoted himself to finding cures for his twin sister Millennia, for the scarlet rot that consumed her, for the blight of undeath that plagued those who lost the guidance of grace. He was gentle where his siblings were fierce. He was patient where they were impetuous. He grew the Erdtree as an alternative to the Erdtree, a place of refuge for those the Golden Order had deemed unworthy of its light. But Miquella had a deeper ambition, one that would require him to leave behind everything he was. To enter the realm of shadow, Miquella divested himself. Piece by piece, like a traveller shedding garments before entering a sacred space, he left behind his flesh, that eternal child's body that had been both prison and identity. He left behind his power, the great rune that had been his birthright, the golden light that flowed through his veins, and perhaps most remarkably, he left behind his love. Not the memory of love, not the capacity for love, but the love itself, the St. Trina half of his being, that gentle dream-weaving aspect that had comforted so many lost souls. He set it aside like a lantern left at the threshold, a final gift to those who would follow after. What remained after all this divestiture was something almost nothing. A will without a body, a purpose without passion, a direction without desire. And it was this diminished, purified essence that stepped through the veil and into the realm of shadow, seeking what could only be found there, the power to become a god in truth, not merely in potential. The followers of Miquella came after him, each drawn by their own understanding of his mission, each carrying their own interpretation of what he sought and why. There was Leda, the Needle Knight, whose devotion to Miquella bordered on the religious. She had been touched by his kindness in some earlier age. The specifics are unclear, as they often are when gods are involved, and she had sworn herself to his cause with a fervour that left no room for doubt or questioning. She gathered others to her, forming a fellowship bound not by oaths or blood but by shared purpose, or so she believed. For Leda's certainty was both her strength and her flaw. She saw Miquella's mission as pure, his intentions as unambiguous, and anyone who questioned either as a potential threat to be managed or eliminated. There was Sir Ansbach, the pureblood knight, who brought with him the quiet dignity of a warrior past his prime, but far from past his skill. Ansbach had served Moxalor, the Lord of Blood, whose dynasty had been shattered and whose body had been used as a vessel for purposes he never consented to. Ansbach's loyalty was complicated, layered, the kind of devotion that persists even when the object of devotion has been transformed beyond recognition. He came to the realm of shadow seeking answers, and perhaps seeking a way to honour what remained of his lord's legacy. There was Freya, the Red-Mane Knight, whose connection to General Radahn gave her journey a particular poignancy. She had fought beside the Star Scourge in his campaigns, had witnessed his incredible power and his terrible burden, the gravity that held the stars themselves in place. She knew what Radahn was. She knew what he had sacrificed to protect the world from the void beyond the stars, and she had her own views on what Miquella's plans for Radahn might mean. Others came too. More, the quiet merchant with his forlorn wares and his gentle, sad eyes. Thiolier, devoted to St. Trina, with a love that was almost prayer. Dryleaf Dane, the martial artist seeking a worthy challenge. Each of them added their thread to the tapestry, being woven in the shadowed land, and each of them would find that the truths they uncovered were more complex and more painful than they had anticipated. What bound these followers together was not agreement but proximity, the simple fact of having walked the same paths, breathed the same shadowed air, felt the same gravity of purpose pulling them deeper into a land that seemed to exist outside the ordinary passage of time. They argued among themselves. They questioned each other's motives. They formed alliances that shifted like sand, and they held grudges that burned with a quiet persistence. In this way, they were not so different from the demigods they served, fractured, passionate, searching for meaning in a world that seemed determined to withhold it. Leda watched them all with the careful attention of someone who has learned to read the subtle signs of wavering loyalty. She noted who hesitated when Miquella's name was spoken. She noted who averted their eyes from the Scadutree. She noted who lingered too long in the ruins of the Hornsent, reading inscriptions that the Golden Order had never meant to be read again. And she drew her own conclusions, building a map of trust and suspicion that would guide her actions in the days to come. The Tarnished moved among them like a ghost, observing, listening, sometimes fighting alongside them and sometimes against them. The Fellowship's fractures grew wider with each passing day, each revelation, each step deeper into a land that seemed designed to test not just strength, but conviction. Bonds formed in the light of shared purpose grew brittle in the shadow of shared doubt, and all the while the Scadutree watched with its patient, weeping gaze, as if it had seen this pattern before, the coming together, the falling apart, the eternal human cycle of hope and disillusionment. For the realm of shadow held not only Miquella's ambition but Marika's secret, and that secret, buried so deep that even the Scadutree's roots had difficulty reaching it, was the original sin upon which the Golden Order was founded. The Hornsent had not simply been worshippers of the Crucible. They had been its caretakers, its scholars, its priests. They had built a civilization around the wild divinity of the Crucible, and that civilization had reached heights of sophistication that the Golden Order's histories deliberately obscured. Their spiraling architecture was not primitive, but profoundly complex, encoding mathematical relationships that mirrored the Crucible's own growth patterns. Their rituals were not savage, but deeply intentional, designed to channel and distribute the Crucible's blessings in ways that sustained both land and people, and Marika had destroyed them. Not in battle, though battles there were, but through something more insidious. She had taken the Crucible's power for herself, or rather, she had taken the aspect of it she found useful, the golden, ordered aspect, and discarded the rest. She had drawn the light from the Crucible and left the shadow. She had taken the root and left the branch, and in doing so, she had created the very division that the realm of shadow embodied, the split between what the world chose to remember and what it chose to forget. Messmer knew this. He had always known it, in the way that children know the truths their parents try to hide, not through evidence or argument, but through a bone-deep recognition that something is being concealed. His fire, his serpent, his exile, these were not random afflictions. They were the consequences of his mother's original choice. He was the embodiment of what she had rejected, placed in the land she had sealed away, tasked with guarding the door to her own guilt. This is why the Scadutree weeps. This is why the shadows in the realm of shadow feel heavy and alive. They are not merely the absence of light, they are the presence of everything the light refused to carry. As the Tarnished wandered deeper into this veiled land, they encountered the remnants of Marika's campaign against the old world. Great fortresses crumbling under the weight of centuries, armies reduced to restless spirits, still fighting wars whose purpose they had long forgotten. The spirits of Hornsent wandering their ruined towers, calling out for a divinity that had been stolen from them. And everywhere the Scadutree watched. Its dark canopy spread across the sky like a wound, and beneath it the land held its breath. The followers of Miquella pressed forward, each pursuing their own understanding of his will. Leda grew more suspicious, more controlling, her certainty hardening into something that resembled paranoia. She began to see threats in her own companions, questioning the loyalty of anyone whose devotion did not mirror her own absolute faith. Ansbach grew more thoughtful, more troubled, as the implications of Miquella's plan became clearer. To resurrect a lord, to take the soul of Radan and bind it to a new body, creating a consort fit for a god, was not merely ambitious. It was a violation of the natural order, a manipulation of death itself that echoed the very sins the Golden Order had committed. Freya's feelings were perhaps the most complicated of all. Radahn had been her commander, her hero, the greatest warrior she had ever known. The prospect of his return filled her with a fierce joy, and yet the manner of that return troubled her. Was this truly resurrection, or was it a kind of puppetry? Was Radahn being brought back to life, or was he being brought back to service? And if the latter, whose service? Miquella's, or the purpose that Miquella had chosen for him, regardless of what Radahn himself might have wanted? These questions hung in the shadowed air like motes of dust in a shaft of light that never quite reaches the floor. The land itself seemed to respond to the tension. The Scadutree's sap thickened, its branches reaching lower, as if trying to embrace the earth. The shadows deepened in places where Miquella's followers gathered, as if the realm itself recognized the significance of what was unfolding and drew closer to witness. Messmer watched from his fortress, his spear resting across his knees, his fire burning low and steady in his chest. He had been watching for so long that the act of watching had become indistinguishable from the act of living. He did not move toward the newcomers, did not challenge them, did not welcome them. He simply observed, as he had always observed, waiting for whatever would happen next. In the deepest places of the realm of shadow, far below the Scadutree's roots, in chambers that had been old when the crucible was young, Miquella's plan reached its culmination. The divested god had found what he sought, the ancient power, the connection to the divine that predated the Golden Order, the raw material from which gods could be forged. And with that power, he called to Radahn, the Star Scourge, the mightiest of the demigods, the one who had held the very stars in place through sheer force of will and gravitational mastery. Radahn, who had fought millennia to a standstill, who had been consumed by the scarlet rot, who had wandered the battlefield of Caelid as a mindless husk, still fighting phantom battles against enemies long dead. Radahn, whose body was a ruin, but whose soul blazed like a second star trapped in mortal flesh. Miquella called, and what answered was not the broken thing that had shambled across the scarlet wastes. It was the warrior in his prime, the golden-haired champion, the beloved general, a younger body, a fiercer will, resurrected and refined, bound not to the gravity that had once been his burden, but to the purpose of a god who needed a lord at his side. When the Tarnished finally faced this resurrected Radahn, they faced something that should not have been possible. A warrior returned from ruin, wearing the face of his glory days, wielding the power he had commanded at his peak. And behind him, close enough to touch, radiant with the terrible beauty of a god who had sacrificed everything for this moment, stood Miquella. The battle that followed was not merely physical. It was a clash of philosophies, a confrontation between the way things are and the way one being desperately wanted them to be. Miquella believed, had to believe, had given up everything to believe, that a gentler order was possible, that the Golden Order's sins could be redeemed through a new god, one who understood mercy, who had divested himself of the cruelties that power so often breeds. But the Tarnished had walked the long road, had seen the Erdtree and the Scadutree, the golden and the shadowed, the remembered and the forgotten, had understood in the quiet way that understanding comes to those who wander long enough, that no single light can illuminate everything, that every brightness casts a shadow, that the attempt to create a world without darkness is itself a kind of darkness. The battle ended, as all battles in the lands between eventually end with a defeat, but the meaning of that defeat shifts, depending on where one stands. For Miquella it was the end of hope, not the destruction of hope, but its transmutation into something that could no longer be acted upon. For Radahn it was perhaps a second mercy, a release from the service he had been bound to, a return to the rest he had earned through a lifetime of sacrifice. And for the Tarnished it was something quieter, an understanding, a recognition that the world cannot be fixed through any single act of will, no matter how powerful, no matter how well-intentioned, that the shadows are not enemies to be defeated, but companions to be acknowledged. That the Scadutree weeps not because it is broken, but because it remembers. Messmer remained in his fortress after the battles were done. The fire in his chest burned the same as it always had. The serpent coiled around his heart was no more restless than before, no more settled. He had watched it all, the coming, the fighting, the leaving, with the same patient attention he had given to centuries of watching. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The Scadutree continued to grow, its dark branches spreading against the sky like veins beneath skin. Its sap dripped and pooled, carrying with it the memories of a world before the Golden Order drew its clean and brutal lines. In those pools, if one looked long enough, one could see reflections of what had been lost, not the Hornsense towers or the Crucible's wild growth, but something more fundamental, a way of being in the world that did not require the division of light from shadow, sacred from profane, remembered from forgotten. The realm of shadow persists. It is not a place of punishment, despite the suffering that saturates its soil. It is a place of truth, the kind of truth that the brilliant and the powerful cannot bear to look at directly. It is the acknowledgement that for every golden age, there is a shadow age. For every story told in light, there is a story whispered in darkness. And both are necessary, both are real. Marika understood this, which is why she sealed the realm away rather than destroying it. She could not destroy the shadow without destroying the light it defined. She could only hide it, contain it, leave it to grow in its own darkness while she built her golden citadel in the sun. And in that choice, the choice to hide rather than to destroy, there is perhaps a sliver of something that is not quite mercy and not quite love, but something adjacent to both. A recognition that what she had rejected still mattered. That the shadow she cast was not merely absence but presence. That the sun she left behind to guard it was not merely a soldier but a witness. The Scadutree whispers this truth to anyone who stands beneath its canopy long enough to hear. It says, "I am not your enemy. I am your memory. I am the thing you set aside in order to become what you are. And I will be here, growing, weeping, reaching, long after the gold has faded and the light has dimmed, the shadows lengthen, the sap drips, the fire burns low, and somewhere in the deep places of the world, the memory of the Crucible stirs, not seeking revenge, not seeking restoration, but simply existing as memories do, persistent and patient and profoundly, achingly alive. This is the way of things in the lands between. The light does not conquer the shadow does not consume the light. They exist in an uneasy partnership, each defining the other, each incomplete without the other. And those who walk between them, the tarnished, the wanderers, the seekers of truth, carry both within themselves, and in carrying both, come to understand something that the gods themselves struggle to accept, that the world is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be inhabited. The night deepens over the realm of shadow. The Scadutree's branches sway in a wind that carries no sound. The last embers of Messmer's fire glow like distant stars, and the land holds its breath, as it has always held its breath, waiting for the remembering that never quite comes and never quite fails to come. Rest now. The shadows will keep watch. They always have. Good night.